Today, we begin in Genesis chapter 12 and move through chapter 16. God now narrows his focus from the nations to one man, Abram. Through him, the story of redemption will unfold. I will read key passages and I encourage you to read the full chapters on your own. The full reading reference is provided for you below. Genesis chapter 12, verses 1 to 3. God tells Abram, "Go from your country, from your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you, and all peoples on earth will be blessed through you." This is a call to leave what is known and walk by faith. In Genesis chapter 12 and verse 4, Abram goes. He does not have all of the details, but he obeys. In Genesis chapter 12, 7 to 8, God appears to Abram and confirms the promise, and Abram builds an altar. Worship marks his journey. But in Genesis chapter 12, 10 to 13, a famine comes, and Abram goes down to Egypt. Out of fear, he tells Sarai to say she's his sister instead of his wife. Fear enters. Even in calling, y'all, there is a struggle. Yet in Genesis chapter 12 and verse 17, God intervenes and protects Sarai, preserving the promise. In Genesis chapter 13, verses 5 to 9, conflict arises between Abram's and Lot's herdsmen. Abram chooses to preserve relationship over keeping the financial upper hand. So Lot chooses first where he will go. In Genesis chapter 13, 10 to 11, Lot chooses, however, based on what he sees, the well-watered plain near Sodom. But Genesis 13 and verse 13 tells us the people of Sodom were wicked. In Genesis chapter 13, 14 to 17, after Lot separates, God speaks again and expands the promise. Abram's descendants will be like the dust of the earth. God gave him his own perspective over his own, or man's, like Lot had. Separation brings clarity. In Genesis chapter 14, verses 11 to 12, Lot is taken captive during a war between kings. In Genesis chapter 14, verses 14 to 16, Abram pursues, defeats the kings, and rescues Lot. Then in Genesis 14, 18 to 20, Abram encounters Melchizedek. It says, "Then Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine." I hope you caught that. Melchizedek was priest of God Most High. Then Abram gave him a tenth of everything. There is no genealogy given for Melchizedek. He appears as both king and priest. This is significant. Melchizedek stands as a prototype, a foreshadowing of the Son of God. A king and a priest, without recorded beginning or end, receiving honor from Abram. Later scripture reveals this more fully, showing a priesthood not based on lineage, but established by God. Melchizedek blessed Abram in the name of God Most High, El Elyon, emphasizing his power and might. In Genesis 14, 22 to 23, Abram refuses the king of Sodom's offer. He will not take anything, so no one can say they made him rich. His trust is in God. In Genesis chapter 15 and 1, God says, "Do not be afraid, Abram. I am your shield, your very great reward." Genesis 15 and verse 5, God tells Abram to look at the stars, so shall his offspring be. Then in Genesis 15 and 6, Abram believed the Lord, and he credited to him as righteousness. Righteousness is counted through faith. In Genesis 15:9-18, God establishes a covenant passing between torn animals himself, showing the promise depends on him, God. In Genesis 16:1-3, Sarai gives Hagar to Abram because she has not had children. However, this is not what God said, but they act in their own understanding. In Genesis 16:4-6, conflict follows and Hagar flees. But in Genesis 16:7-10, the angel of the Lord finds Hagar in the wilderness and speaks to her, giving her instruction and promise. Then in Genesis 16:13, Hagar says, "You are the God who sees me, Jehovah El Roi." Even in the wilderness, y'all, God sees. What these chapters show, they show this. God calls and expects faith. Genesis 12:1-4. Fear does not cancel God's promise. Genesis 12:10-17. Choices based on sight can mislead. Genesis 13:10-13. God's covenant is established by him. Genesis 15:7-18. Melchizedek points forward to a greater king and priest. Genesis 14:18-20. And God sees, even in distress. Genesis 16 and verse 13. Now, let's look at this connection across Scripture. Genesis chapter 12:3 points forward to blessing for all nations. Genesis 15:6 comes foundational for understanding righteousness by faith. And Genesis 14:18-20, the priest will be shown and fulfilled later. God is already revealing his plan step by step. I encourage you to read chapters 12-16 in full. Watch how God calls, how Abram responds, and how the promise continues, even through human weakness. The story continues tomorrow.